Hello and welcome back to GeeknSpeak, the GeeknSpeak podcast. Today, we are revisiting a mini-series that we haven't gotten to in a couple months. This is our How to Build series, and today we are talking about mill decks. We'll get into the specifics, but we're not really talking about self-mill decks. We kind of feel like that's its own category. We'll get into the nuances of that, but mill as an archetype in Commander should be a good topic. How good is it in Commander? How do you build it? What card should you look for? We'll get into all of that. But join with me today is Preston. Preston, how's it going, man?
Good. Mill is a bit of a contentious archetype, to say the least, so this should be a fun little discussion, especially if people get in the comments and give us their ideas on how they feel about Mill. I think we could have a good little discussion here this time.
Yeah, for sure. And if you want to keep the conversation going, you can also find a link to our Discord in the description of this video if you want to hang out and talk Magic there as well. And I am your host, Morgan. I am also excited to talk Mill. I just like the little bit of annoyance it causes the opponents. They just kind of. It's not even that bad. Like Mill's really not that bad, but they're just like, oh, it makes them mad, and it's funny. And then Jason, he is not here. He is feeling a little under the weather, so send him good wishes. But he's hanging out with us, so he's probably still the one editing this video, so tell him hi. If you want to help out the show, you can do all the YouTube algorithm stuff, that being leaving comments, hitting like, being subscribed if you're not already, checking out our other videos. This is episode 71 of our podcast. We have a lot of gameplay. We have all sorts of other stuff going on. And if you want to go the extra mile, you can head over to patreon.com/geekandseek YouTube. That's the best way to support the show. And coming very soon, we will be having a Patreon-only episode of our Commander Gameplay series. Favorite comment of the week. This is from Gray007. Timestamp. This is on the most recent episode of our gameplays, or the Bloomborough episode. I can't believe that's already a couple months old. I'm sorry, guys. I said I was going to do one a month, and I've been slacking, dog, so I apologize. But comment is a timestamp, and then this was the best moment of the game. 2 players each draw 19 cards, and Preston's response is, I'm going to look at the top card of my deck. Yeah, it's classic. Do you actually know the moment he's talking about?
That was a while ago, but that's a very fun thing to do. We all know Jason loves doing it.
I clicked on the timestamp. So I think what it was is Steven cast a Decree of Pain to wipe the board, but I had cast Wedding Ring earlier in the game, so I also got to draw all those cards. Yeah, it was good. But I do associate. I'm going to look at the in response. I'm going to look at the top card of my library. I do associate that with Jason, but it is something that we have all kind of adopted, and we all try to play those cards as often as we can, just because it's kind of dumb and goofy.
I like doing it when it's clear I'm about to lose a game. It always makes it funny to me when that happens.
Judge, he's just running the clock. He's just running the clock. Couple news things. Magicon Vegas is this week. A couple days, starting a couple days after this video is coming out. I'm gonna be there. Tommy was supposed to come with me, but Tommy's a bum. By that I mean he's in his brother's wedding that weekend. So what a loser, right? But yeah, if you're gonna be at Magicon Vegas, make sure you come say hi. Let's get some games in, all that good stuff. And then also, GeeknSpeak is almost up to 3,000 views, which doesn't, or 3,000 subscribers. We have way more than 3,000 views. We are almost up to 3,000 subscribers. It doesn't necessarily sound like a big number, but we've been at this for a long time, and we really enjoy what we're doing. So we are happy that other people have tagged along for the ride and are enjoying the content. So, yeah, Preston, do you have any ideas on, should we do anything specific for celebrating 3K views, or is that like maybe we just hold off for like a more significant number, or anything like that?
If people have any good ideas in the comments, I'd be down. But otherwise, we might do something special for like 5K. That'd be a good idea. But we might do something.
Maybe we could at least do like some kind of live stream. Like I know when we hit 1,000, we did like a little hour-long live stream, just Q&A and stuff. Or maybe we could do a live stream game. We kind of figured out how to do that, so maybe we could do something like that. Just hang out for an hour or so. Yeah. All right, so let's get into the meat and potatoes of today's podcast. We are talking about mill decks. So specifically, we need to set a definition for mill decks, because I think you could think of it in a few different ways. So specifically, we are talking about mill as in you are going to make your opponents run out of cards, and that's how you are going to make them lose and how you will win. That is different than a self-mill deck, which is just like a graveyard deck where you're dredging and filling up your own graveyard and stuff like that, and using your own graveyard for value, Reanimator styles, Muldrotha style deck, stuff like that. I think that is very different because in the self-mill deck, you're kind of just looking for your own value from your own deck, whereas in mill, you are specifically making your opponent run out of cards. So there is going to be some overlap in what cards you run, but I think it's important that we set that definition. Am I missing anything on that, Preston?
Well, there's also decks where like they hit all four players. Like my Gyruda deck mills myself and all the opponents. So those also exist, and those can kind of be like a Frankenstein between the two. But yeah.
Uh, so I would like to start off with the obvious question: is mill even good? Because two things. It doesn't scale well in Commander, and it irritates everyone. Let's start with that one first. In Commander, mill is really not that scary. Like if someone's like, "All right, Preston, mill 10," you might just be like, "Okay," but that's like the appropriate mature response. But really, casual players especially, they lose their minds. They think that this is the worst thing because they'll see that you like milled like one of their favorite creatures or you milled a land that they wanted, and they'll be like, "How dare you?" And it's like, okay, but you didn't know it was there, right? Like you didn't know you were gonna draw that anytime soon. So like they get like more upset over it than they should. So then you draw more hate than you deserve. But also in Commander, it doesn't scale well, right? Because in 1v1, think of like the modern 8 crab decks and stuff like that. Those decks work because you only have one opponent and
With 60
they're
cards.
exactly, it's only one opponent, 60 cards. In Commander, it's 100 cards for 3 different opponents. So, and like you had said, there are cards that hit all players or all opponents, so that's easier than like, playing Ruin Crab or something like that where it only targets one player, right, for when you have your landfall. But still, it doesn't scale very well. So, what do you think? Is mill even good in Commander? Because to me, it doesn't seem like it scales well to 100 card singleton, as well as draws more hate than is necessary.
There's a few ways you can build mill that do get into those stronger tiers. Like there's the Bruvac plus the one card where someone mills their like half their library. That's just getting someone out of the game with one card, basically. So there are a couple versions of mill that I do think get close to the stronger end, but you are definitely going to be getting more hate than is probably warranted for how strong your deck is most of the time.
Mm. Well, it is also worth mentioning that if you look on the um, mill category, they're called it tags now on EDH Rec. It's not themes anymore. It's called tags. The number 2 mono blue option in the category for mill is Bruvac, which is if an opponent would mill one or more cards, they mill twice that many cards instead. That's still a $24 card. Oh, okay. I was looking at it. It looked like Mind Skinner. Oh, yeah. Okay, that's why it's showing up top. I will say though, let's talk a little bit about the Mind Skinner because it's a pretty new card. It's just from Duskmourn, and people seemed kind of on the fence about it because on one hand, it's a pretty decent clock, and you could pair it with like prevent damage clauses, so you're still hitting people for 10 commander damage, which is kind of funny. But I mean, this is a ton of mill because it scales for each opponent. It's not just the opponent you're attacking or whatever with the Mind Skinner. So Krim actually played this on Commander Clash on one of the Duskmourn episodes. And everyone's like, "Oh, Krim, that's hilarious." And then on turn 5, they're like, "Guys, we gotta kill Krim." So it actually like it does add up a lot because you kind of like Voltron-y on the Mind Skinner, right? You buff its power and stuff with equipment so that you're milling them for even more. So I actually think that both of those are pretty good options. Do you have another commander that you really like for the mill category? Aromi of the Dead Tide is also a semi-popular one. I see. That's probably the most common one I see when I've played against mill decks. I've played against a few. That's probably the one I play against the most.
Demir's probably what, second place after Mono Blue for Mill most of the time when people are gonna choose their commanders. So yeah, there's a couple like Fanax is one I know people used to, especially that used to be a pretty big one. So there's a couple options.
If you are using EDH Rec as a resource, remember that mill, a lot of the options it's showing are also the self mill category. Like it's
Oh
showing
yeah,
cards like
mono green.
Muldrotha. Yeah,
All the mono green ones are self mill ones.
yeah. And the Wise Mothman, I think, is another pretty popular commander from recent time. And that I could kind of see both ways. Like, I think that's like your Gyruda deck in a lot of ways, in the sense of like, yeah, you might mill out your opponents, but you're also really heavily utilizing your own graveyard. Is there is there merit for doing that, even in the mill decks, where your goal is specifically to mill out your opponents? Is there an argument for still running cards that mill you and then cards that let you get value out of your graveyard? Because that's obviously very strong, but it is going to semi significantly uh, change your deck building strategy. Do you feel like it's worth it? Do you think it's hit or miss? What would be some of those first cards you would include if you take that route?
If you're going to do it, you need to like commit to it. You shouldn't just throw in a few cards that say everyone mills, because if you only have a couple, then you're throwing away your own resources and not getting anything out of it. So either you need to pick mill your opponents or be milling everyone. Trying to do half and half is gonna probably screw you over more games than it's gonna help you. So both are good options, but just whichever one sounds more fun to you is what you should focus on.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I was thinking of like my Muldrotha deck. It's my second commander deck I ever built. I still have it, and it is a self mill deck. I am intentionally filling my own graveyard for value, and I have dredge. I am able to recast stuff from my graveyard with Muldrotha, and there's a couple flashback cards in there, stuff like that. And there are a few cards in the 99 of that deck that do incidentally mill other players, but it's for me. It's for myself. I think if it were flipped, I think it works that way. If you are a self mill deck and you are accidentally milling other people, who cares?
Well, sometimes that will backfire if you're playing against other graveyard decks. If that happens, then it is a problem. But obviously, that's pretty playgroup dependent and which decks they like to run. So if that happens, it's a problem. But if you don't think it's going to happen super often, then yeah, it's not as important.
Is that another knock against mill, saying that maybe it's not very good in commander? Because graveyard strategies are pretty popular, whether it be like Muldrotha style decks, the Reanimator style deck, stuff like that. But even if you're not doing that, there's like, just incidental reanimation effects, even if that's not the core focus of your deck, right? Like if you're playing white, you have like Sun Titan is a very popular card. If you're playing red, there's a ton of stuff that's like sack an artifact, get an artifact back. And you might just be playing that for value in any kind of red artifact style deck, even if it's not a graveyard specific one. So is there any argument that just like that's another reason Mill's not very good, is because that's just so popular, so common in Commander?
Well, that's one of the reasons I think mono blue mill is pretty weak nowadays. Like it just has a hard time dealing with it if people have graveyard recursion stuff. But if you pair it with like black or green, which are the two most common things to pair blue with if you want to mill, those are both really good at getting rid of your opponent's graveyards or specific cards out of their graveyards if you think they're going to be a problem. So if you want to make it a little stronger and you're willing to sacrifice a bit of that mill strategy for like interaction with your opponents, you should add green or blue because that'll let you get that scary stuff out of the way by exiling it or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I guess let's use that as our switch into what we think is the best color, because I think we could agree that like if you're playing like the self mill strategies, then you could really say that any of the colors are pretty good. Like they all, like I said, with the Sun Titans in white, the artifact switcheroo stuff in red, the green has a ton of stuff that lets you put stuff in your graveyard and play it again, and stuff like that. I would argue that blue is the best straight up mill. Like if your goal is to just mill out your opponent, blue is the best. But then black, I think, is probably the second best because you do have all those Dimir commanders and cards that care about mill, care about the number of cards in your opponent's graveyards. And then also, black is going to be the best way to back up exiling people's graveyards, other than green, I guess. But like you have Bajuka Bog as a land that does it. You have other cards that there's like a new MDFC that when it enters that exiles graveyards. There's cards like Leyline of the Void. That's actually hilarious. Stuff like that. And if you're just in mono blue, like you probably can still mill people out, but you don't have the answers as readily available. Like your best option is probably
I think there's a few
a
colorless
Scavenger
ones that
Grounds.
do it.
Yeah, so Scavenger Grounds is the desert that you can pay to tap it, exile all graveyards. But then that really shuts down if you want to use your own graveyard because it exiles all graveyards. But then also in mono blue, how many ways do you really have to tutor up Scavenger Grounds? Like how consistently can you do that in mono blue? So I think that mono like blue is probably actually the best mill color, but then I think Dimir is by far the best actual color combination for this. And mostly it's because you don't want to give your opponents value.
Yeah, if you're trying to mill your opponents, I would most of the time suggest Demir as your best bet. If you want a self mill deck, maybe I might give that to Simic. Demir is also still good, but Simic is very good at filling its own graveyard and getting value out of it. So either one of those are options. If you want to hit your opponent stuff, Demir is probably better than Mono Blue at this point.
Well, and I've talked about my Muldrotha deck, which is Dimir, and then also green. So
Yeah,
but you have a mono green self mill deck too, right?
yeah,
So
yeah. My strong deck, it is also pretty good at just filling up the graveyard by itself. So, and all of the mono green stuff, when you look up mill on EDH deck, is self mill stuff. So green is pretty good at that.
yeah.
So yeah.
So if we're talking about like the best mill cards, I think you're right in the sense that probably your best bet is to kind of do like a combo situation, right? Where you're playing probably, Ludovic or not Ludovic, Bruvac. You play Bruvac with something that already makes them mill half their deck. So something like Fleet Swallower, which is the 7 mana 6/6 fish that when it attacks target opponent, puts the top half of their library into their graveyard. So you do some kind of combo like that where you're just gonna like one shot someone. That's probably your best option, but that kind of requires you to like play a lot of tutors and then it feels a little sweaty. So if you're playing mill more of the quote unquote fair way, what are some of the best cards that we think are here for this strategy? I actually do think Fleet Swallower is good, even if you're not comboing it with Bruvac and stuff, just because I think a 7 mana 6/6 fish is hilarious. But then also half of your opponent's deck, especially in the early-ish part of the game, like if you actually play this on turn 5, 6, something like that, this is actually going to be putting in a ton of work on your mill strategy.
So like Tasha's Hideous Laughter is one that's a pretty common one. It doesn't actually say mill, but it's doing mill things, but even better because it's immediately putting them into exile.
Hmm.
There's one I'm trying to think of. It's an instant.
The next one I really wanted to hit up while you're looking that up is the Mesmeric Orb, which is a 2 mana artifact that whenever a player, so not just your opponents, also you, whenever a player untaps a permanent that they control, they mill that many cards. So that is a great way to especially nerf the green decks that are going burr with their lands. Just whenever they're, casting their big creatures, they're having to tap out other lands. It's especially bad if they're attacking. It's especially bad if they have mana dorks, their mana rocks, all that stuff. So it's a great way to just even if you're only milling like let's say 7, you make your opponent every upkeep when they're untapping 7 cards. That's going to add up very quickly, especially when Mir Orb is a 2 mana artifact that could come down very very early and start putting in a lot of work. And that's also good if you do have those cards that let you play out of your own graveyard as well, because it is milling you as
Yeah.
well.
The card I was thinking of is called Mind Grind. It's an X spell, and whatever you pay for X, people reveal that many land cards from the top of their library, then put all the cards they reveal into their graveyard. With how many people in Commander don't like to run as many lands as they probably should, you can play that mid game and possibly get some people out or close to getting them out. So that's one I really like. That's one of the only real mill cards in my Gyruda deck, besides Gyruda's own effect. So that's
Yeah,
a fun one.
because your Gyruda deck is mostly just play Gyruda, get value, flicker it, stuff like that, right? It's not
Yeah,
like you have milled people out with it, but that's not like necessarily the goal.
yeah. There's a few other creatures that can do some milling, but it's mostly Gyruda doing it. And then maybe getting that win with Mind Grind I've gotten a couple times.
Yeah. And if you want to see that deck of Preston's in action, it's been on the show, our Commander gameplay show, at least once. It was on the episode where everyone played one of your decks. That's the deck that Jason played, I think. I feel like it was on another episode, but I can't think of what it would have
It's
been.
also for sure in episode 0.
Oh, right. Yes, the test episode when before it was officially our show. Yes. Cool. Were there any other cards that we really wanted to make sure we hit? Oh, Maddening Cacophony is another one. That's the one that's for 2 mana sorcery, each opponent mills 8. But then if you kick it, then each opponent mills half their library rounded up. That's another thing is like if we're gonna talk about annoying, these style of effects are annoying because a lot of the time you don't actually know how many cards are left in your library, right? Like it's not Moto or Arena where you can just hover your mouse over it and see. You actually usually are actually going to have to count out your library to see how many cards and then do the half. And that's so annoying. So it's another way of just like irritating your opponents enough that they're like, we got to kill this guy. Like, even if you're the mill player and you're not the threat, you're going to draw so much hate because you're just annoying people. But I actually do think that this card's like cracked. Like, if you're playing mill, this card's insane because it does hit
Yeah.
each of your opponents as well. And then especially if you're in multicolor, Ruin Crab, and then the I don't remember what the other one is, the original Hedron Crab. Those Hedron Crab and Ruin Crab, especially if you're in multicolor and you have fetch lands, that's a good way to just get incidental mill as well. But if you're playing mono blue, I don't know if I would run them just because it's way better if you're playing fetch lands.
I don't recommend doing this, but if you wanted to, there are a few options for colorless mill, and that's Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger and Ulamog the Defiler. If you wanted to try to make a colorless mill deck work, there you go. People aren't going to like that, and it's not going to happen, and you're probably not going to win, but you can try it.
Yeah. And that's actually kind of even better because those, okay, it's not actually better probably because colorless obviously has pretty intense deck building restrictions that you wouldn't have if you're playing decks with colors. But I have been milled out to Ulamog because I mean, it's like, because it's on attack, right? That you exile the top 20. Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's like a 10-10 indestructible. So you can be chump blocked for days, but then that adds up really quick. Especially by the time it comes down in the mid to late game, it only takes a couple attacks and you probably are gone. So it actually is semi-effective. And I actually think that those are probably worth considering. If you're playing a mill deck that wants to steal stuff from your opponent's graveyards, maybe you don't play those because you're exiling all those cards and you're not going to get value out of them. But um, it's worth considering if your sole purpose is just to make your opponent run out cards. But and in the vein of value cards of like utilizing cards, um, from the graveyard specifically, Sir Conrad was the last card that I wanted to talk about, which is 3 black, 5/4 legendary human knight. Whenever another creature dies or a creature card is put into a graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield, or a creature card leaves your graveyard, uh, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. So that specifically leaving your graveyard, but then the other two modes do count for all players. So if this is on the battlefield, and you're doing all your milling, it's probably going to add up to a decent amount of damage. And you can also pay 1 and a black to make each player mill a card. So if you have a way to either create an insane amount of black mana with Cabal, coffers, stuff, or you have a way to actually make infinite black mana, that's just a win by itself. But even if you get to the point where it doesn't look like you're actually going to be able to mill people out because maybe they have one of those big Eldrazi that's like when it hits your graveyard, shuffle it into your deck. Like mill decks are screwed against those kind of cards. But this is a way that like even if you're not actually able to mill them out, you're dealing enough damage at a decent enough rate that you might actually be able to kill them with damage.
And it's a good thing you bring this up because those kind of cards are a good reason to run some of the exile cards in your
Yeah.
mill decks. Because sometimes people are just going to have those cards where they will shuffle it back in. There's the green card where if it gets milled, you shuffle your entire graveyard back in. So those aren't always the most common in Commander, but just in case you run across them, you should have at least a few options for exiling, I would say, if you want to build mill.
And
Like
isn't
opponent mill, obviously.
Yeah, and isn't Elixir of Immortality like a semi-popular card? Like I know that you and I specifically used to play that card a lot, but I don't know if it's like actually like a highly played card necessarily. But like, yeah, there are just a ton of those effects where you can just like shuffle crap from your graveyard back into your library. So that is like the worst nightmare for a mill player is those kind of effects. So yeah, I guess the exiling stuff is super helpful against those. And then Sir Conrad, like I had mentioned, that way that even if you do hit those cards, you are still milling and stuff like that, and you're dealing the damage. So maybe you can get there that way. So having that little bit of a backup plan is a good idea.
Elixir of Immortality is in 75,797 decks on EDH Rec.
Is there a
So it's a little
percentage?
popular.
Is there a
I mean,
percentage
that's
attached to that?
2%, but that's because it's a colorless card.
That's
So,
actually kind of impressive. Yeah, 2% is actually probably good, isn't it? Like I don't know what a normal like staple in colorless would necessarily be, but like that sounds
well,
like kind of a lot. I mean, obviously that's probably less than like Soul Ring, Arcane Signet, stuff like that, but
yeah, Soul Ring is 85%.
right.
So it's not quite as good as Soul Ring, but
Oh, wow.
that is a good
Uh,
card.
a ban-worthy card is it's not it's somehow better than Elixir of Immortality. Who'da thunk? Well, cool. Do we have any closing thoughts on Mill? On whether you think people should play it, things that they should be looking out for, if they decide to build a Mill deck?
I think you just need to know how mature your playgroup is and then decide, am I willing to put up with some of that hate? If not, do I want to do self mill or do I want to try to make a weaker version and explain that it's a weaker version and maybe they'll let you off the hook, maybe not. So knowing your playgroup is a big part of it, but if you want to do it, you should. Because of all the more toxic ways to win, mill's not that bad, let's be honest.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that if you specifically like the idea of graveyard synergies and stuff like that, you're way better off playing some kind of self mill deck, some kind of reanimator deck, or a value like Strong or Muldrotha or something like that. I think you're way better off doing something like that. But if you like the psychological damage that you inflict by making your opponents lose their own cards and miss their land drops and stuff like that, then I think it is there is something kind of fun about it, but you have to be ready for the hate because your opponents will be annoyed. Even if you're not the threat at the table, they will use resources to mess with you. And then also make sure you're packing your answers because recursion and stuff is just so common. Even if you're not playing against graveyard decks, people are playing their Sun Titans. They are playing Reanimate. They are just playing Magic. They're just playing Magic.
Mm.
So you need to make sure that you're running your graveyard hate and stuff like that, so that you don't fall apart.
Yeah.
All right. That is a super short episode, but we didn't have as many notes as I think we would normally have, and we didn't have Jason. Jason likes to talk. So this is a definitely a shorter episode, but that means that we have a little bit of time to talk about something cool outside of the world of Magic. Preston, what's going on with you? Or you could talk about something in the world of Magic. You got a cool deck you're brewing, but what's new with you? What's Preston up to?
Well, I don't really have anything outside of Magic myself. I am getting ready, getting my deck ready for our Christmas episode. We're gonna try to film that here in a little bit. I'm down to that like 50 cards left trying to cut stage, and it's tough
Yeah, man.
because I'm doing something a little silly with the deck. I think people are gonna appreciate it. I'm gonna have a good time. You four are not probably gonna have the best time, but it'll be fun for me and the viewers, I think.
Okay, okay. I yeah, I'm also trying to get ready, but I won't spoil anything because it's a couple months before it's coming out. But I am super hyped for the deck that I built. But the problem is in order for me to build it the way I want to build it, I have to finish reorganizing my cards. And that is
Mm.
I don't know how often or if you have ever just like tackled completely reorganizing your collection. It's a nightmare. It's
I tried
awful.
doing it once. I gave up.
Yeah, so I it's a bit of a pain, but I think it'll be worth it. I think it's turning out to be pretty neat. Uh yeah, nothing really new for me since the last time because I think we got to do this last episode too, but yeah, just hanging out to Magicon Vegas and hoping to meet new people. I'm going a
The
couple days.
Avengers got spoiled.
Oh
The new
yeah.
Avengers stuff
Do we want to talk
that got
about that for
spoiled.
for a few minutes? We got the time. Do we
We
want
can,
to
yeah.
what do you think about Okay, so there's a few things that we could talk about. What do you think about um the new cards specifically? Because it's all reprints other than the commanders, other
The
than the
new
actual
legendary
cards that are,
creatures.
yeah, legendaries based off of the superheroes. Everything else is reprints. But these are also more expensive than I think normal secret layers. I think they're $10 more than secret layers would normally be, and they're like the same amount of cards. So, overall, what are your impressions about like reprint quality, the new commanders, pricing, all that stuff?
I don't love the fact that they're charging more, but this is a pretty good collection of cards. All the reprints are ones that people are going to want to play. And I think all the new card designs seemed interesting to me when I checked them out. They all seem to be flavorful and strong without like obviously being problematic. So I I'm excited for it. I don't know if I'm gonna try to get the whole thing or maybe pick one or two. I'm not sure yet.
Yeah, the pricing is the problem for me. Is like I was thinking of like at least getting the Captain America one because it just seems super cool. Like just I haven't had like it just an equipment deck in a little bit, so it'd be kind of fun to like build a new one with Cap throwing stuff. Just sounds kind of fun.
He wants
Uh
to throw his WAP around.
yeah, so I don't know. I might get it, but it does kind of suck that they're charging more. I mean, they can, right? They can get away with it because it's freaking Marvel and people are going to want these. It also sucks that they're limited quantity. Like it's not like one of the like charity ones where they do unlimited. This is actually like one of the normal ones from the last year or so where they will run out. And that kind of sucks. Because that means that these cards are probably going to be very expensive on the secondary market, which for the reprints, whatever. Like if you want these, you probably want them because the art's cool or you like that there's your favorite superhero on them or something like that. But specifically, if you wanted to like build around one of these new commanders, it's kind of a bummer that you might not get to. Like that kind of sucks. But I do actually like all of the new card designs. I actually am kind of underwhelmed by the Wolverine one, which is too bad because I really like the Wolverine. But all of the other commanders I think are freaking dope. They're so cool. Did you also say the arcane signet? If you spend $200 or more on the super drop, you get a arcane signet. That's
Oh,
the
the
Avengers
tower.
Tower. Yeah, that's kind of
Yeah.
cool.
I mean, if you try to buy all of them, you're gonna get there.
Yeah, that's
Maybe
true.
that's what they
That's
were
true.
going for.
Yeah, and I do think that the new art and the reprints are pretty good. Like there's some odd choices or some like not valuable choices, but they all seem semi flavorful, and each
They
of the
get
drops
played at least.
does. Yeah, yeah, and each of the drops has at least one like really good reprint. So, like Wolverine has Berserk, which is like a $20 card, I think. The Storm one has Jessica's Will, which is another
The
pretty
Wolverine one
expensive
has the
card.
Ozolith. I
Oh
think
yeah,
that's the biggest reprint of all this.
yeah. How much is the Ozolith going for? I had an Ozolith and I
Too much.
sold it, and I regret it. It's $35. Wow, yeah. Okay,
Oh,
so there's a
okay.
couple of good
I thought it was a
reprints.
little more.
Yeah.
Maybe it went down a little from the announcement.
Oh, that could be. Except wasn't this just announced like the day before we're recording this? So I can't imagine that it adjusted that quickly. But yeah, I'm excited for these. If we were, you know, able to be doing upkeep more consistently, or if these end up on Magic Online, it would be cool to make a video where we build around these guys because honestly, they do seem like pretty cool commanders. Do you have a favorite one?
Um, they're all pretty good. I really like Storm a lot. I
Storm is
think that
so
might be
cool.
my favorite.
I like the idea of you play Storm and you still just play normal Storm cards because then it just doubles. Like if you actually have like a good Storm turn and then you play your Storm finisher, but then you also get the ability from the commander, that's insane. It's absolutely insane. So you could do some degenerate stuff. Or you could just do something really fair and cast like Opt with Storm count 20. Like that just seems kind of funny. Scry one, draw a card 20 times. That seems awesome. So yeah, I like them.
I'm mad there's
Hopefully
no
they're
Hulk though.
yeah, because Hulk's your favorite character, right?
Yeah, favorite superhero.
I would have to imagine that they get around to it, right? Because they're going to do a lot of Marvel stuff, right? There's going to be the whole modern legal set, if I remember right, like what they did for Lord of the Rings. They're probably going to do Commander precons. We already saw that they're doing some extra Spider-Man things, so
I was
um,
gonna say no Spider-Man seemed weird to me
yeah, they're doing a whole separate drop for
because
Spider-Man.
that's the Marvel guy.
Mhm.
But that yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, so I'm sure we'll get a Hulk. Maybe it's like a transform card, right? Like maybe it's just like a human doctor or whatever on the front, and then on the backside it's the Hulk. Like, yeah.
That would
Maybe
be
it plays
good.
with rad counters. Maybe it can go in your strong deck.
I don't get my hopes up.
All right. Well, I think we can go ahead and just call it there. Let us know in the comments what you think about the Marvel cards, but also let us know what you think about mill decks, because that was actually the point of this episode. We almost spent enough time that this could have just been the Marvel episode. But yeah, we will be back next week for the Halloween episode. We're going to be talking about spooky cards, cards that we think are mostly art, but some other leeway for spooky cards to come in there.
Maybe some
So
flavor text or something.
yeah. So if you also have recommendations, leave those in the comments. We might see them in time before we record. I actually don't know when we're recording that episode, so we might not actually get to see the comments. But leave them anyways, and make sure you're subscribed. Check out our other videos. Oh, and don't forget that in 2 days we are also dropping the new episode of Upkeep. It's finally coming, guys. It's finally actually
Let's
coming.
go.
It's been a long time, but we are finally having a new episode. So make sure you tune in on Friday to see that. Hope you guys have a good next couple days, and we'll see you later.